let's take another breath together. Thank you for being here this morning. So, as some of you guys know, my mom passed recently. Yesterday was the 1 month anniversary of her passing. Yesterday actually also happened to be the 13-year anniversary of my partner's passing. Jackie passed back in 2009 on October 22nd. So yesterday was kind of a big day for anniversaries, death anniversaries. So because this has been such a fresh and recent process for me, I guess I just thought I would take this opportunity of the speaking engagement to share some with you guys about my mom. You might want to get your tissues. I have my tissue ready here. We'll see what goes on here with the tears, or maybe not. I don't know. Because, as many of you probably have also had the experiences when you've had losses, whether it be parents or partners or friends or pets, that, loss is a powerful process. It teaches us many things, I suppose. And, now that I've had this very profound loss of my mom, my birth mother, my only mother in that capacity, I continue to be taught that every loss is different. And grief takes many different forms. Um, when my dad passed, he was in the hospital. He actually gone in the hospital in October for a knee replacement, and after the surgery, had trouble breathing. So they put him, and he ended up on a ventilator. And then, essentially, for almost 6 months, he was in the hospital. They were trying to wean him off a ventilator, and 6 months later, as his body was sort of deteriorating, and they couldn't wean him off the ventilator, and eventually we had to decide to kind of I hate that phrase, but pull the plug on him. And this was in New York, but I was there, and the whole family was there. And my parents had gotten divorced back when I was in my around 20 or so, so my mom wasn't there. But my parents, fortunately, this was another wonderful gift of both my parents, that even after they divorced, they made a conscious choice to stay connected and be civil, and be friends in that capacity. I mean, they didn't hang out as friends, but they hung out as, the leaders of our family. And because we knew there would be birthdays and graduations and weddings and things like that. And so it's another wonderful testament to both of my parents that they were able to do that. And another thing, as I'm speaking here, another thing about my parents, which I'm so grateful for, because not everybody has this. I'm a therapist. I spend hours and hours and hours with people hearing about their pain, which is the purpose of it, to hear about their pain so that we can learn to forgive and transform that. It doesn't mean every transformation includes forgiveness, but it's about finding that place where we don't have to be attached to the pain and we don't have to prolong suffering. But my parents were not verbally abusive in any capacity, whereas many people have sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, all kinds of different abuse. And, my dad, some of you have heard some of my talks before, where I did have some spankings from my dad when I was little, which sometimes people think, oh, it's just a spanking. Some people believe in that, but it was traumatic for me. So that did happen with me and my dad. But other than that, like with both my parents, I don't remember them ever speaking like harshly to us or putting us down. If anything, they lifted us up, and they taught us and encouraged us to the best of their ability, to be like all we could be. And, to the best of their ability. Of course, there was limitations, but encouraging us to be, again, and none of us in our family are famous or anything like that, and not that we have to be, not that that's the goal, but my mom was a really remarkable person. She had many, many accomplishments, some of which I will share here with you. I'm getting my tissue already. And, I wanted to, I have one picture. I would have loved to do a slideshow. I didn't pull that together, but I will share my screen here for a second and see if I can. Now I don't see where I'm finding. Oh, I don't seem to. It's not up on my. Let me see if there's some other way that I could do this. Let's see if I open that and then share. Maybe I can share at least one picture. Oh, there it is. Great. So bring that up. So there. Can you guys see that picture of my mom? That's Joan. Yeah. Okay. And that picture was taken actually a little more than a year ago, July of 2001, when she was still living in her home in Leeds, South Dakota. So, so yeah, because she was now my grandparents, her parents were missionaries on the Arapaho reservation way back in the 30s. My grandparents were very religious people. I'm originally from Long Island, New York, and my grandfather was an adventurer. And so, as a young couple, I guess they went out to Wyoming and became missionaries on the Arapaho reservation. My grandmother was a nurse, and my grandfather could do many things, I guess. So he just sort of taught school. Now, years later, matter of fact, not too long ago, my one of my cousins shared with me that my grandfather had told her at one point that he realized and that he didn't agree with some of the practices that were happening with the Native Americans and taking away their language and just all the things that the United States was doing to unculture the natives, and he was sad about that. And so I was really glad to hear about that. So my mom she was born at the local hospital, but my grandparents were living on the reservation for about 5 years. Because I think their first three children, I think, were born out there. They ended up having four children. The first three were girls, and then finally they had a boy, a son. Um, but then when my mom was about five, my grandmother had three young kids, and living on the res was not really her cup of tea at that point because the family had a nice big house back on Long Island, with help, and so she convinced my grandfather to move back to Long Island so that she could have help, raising these three little kids. So I think he reluctantly, decided to move back to the suburbs as opposed to the wilds of the West, which I think he loved. So so they did do that, and then my mom was raised on Long Island, New York, in Merrick, Long Island, and so she even went to the high school that all of us, there were four kids in my family that all of us went to. Um, so my parents had a little bit of a difficult relationship. My mom actually had gotten pregnant as a single woman when she was around 20-ish, and you know that that could have gone many different ways. But my grandparents sent her down to North Carolina to live at a convent for the end of her pregnancy, and she came home with my sister. Um, and then and then when my sister Jody was two, my mom had met my dad through the church, and they got married. And so, there's a lot more to this story, and I don't have a whole lot of time to share all this, but some of I practice something I call intuitive memory, and it's a form of healing where we can kind of ask ourselves questions about our past, because of course most of us don't have the videotape of especially the traumatic experiences of our lives, or the difficulties, or especially our internal processes, or all the very subtle energetic nuances that happen in our relationships, especially with our parents. And so I practice something I call intuitive memory, which is to ask myself questions about things in my inner world and in my intuition. And when the answers come, just see if that's what feels true. So I feel that, part of what happened in my family, and I know, well, it was that when I was the second child born, my parents got married, and Jody was there, and I was the next child to come. And I think my dad wanted a boy, and so and I feel like energetically, my mom kind of said, "Okay, well, I have my kid. Here's your kid." So I bonded very closely with my dad, and I think my dad was yearning and thirsting for a very deep, loving bond. All of us want that. Who doesn't want deep, loving, secure, feeling like a bond that means so much to us, and especially one where the person hopefully won't go away. Well, as an infant, I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't have the capacity to go anywhere. So one of the most beautiful things was my dad, poured his love into me. I feel like he practically worshiped me, like I was a safe place for him to really pour his love, because I couldn't leave, and I was an infant, and we hadn't had enough experience for me to be mad at him or be a rebellious teenager or whatever. So we had a wonderful, loving bond. in which case I felt like I developed a loyalty to that. I'm also a Taurus, so, very strong capacity for loyalty. So I really bonded. So it's almost like the family was a balance. My mom and sister were over here, and my dad and I were over here, and we, managed that way as much as we could. So in a way, I grew up with my mom, but I didn't feel super close. Like I didn't have a bond with her. Like I was being loyal to the bond with my dad. So I felt like I energetically, to the best of my ability, needed as little from her as possible because my heart and my dad, my Libra moon, was like I'm a balancer, I'm a peacemaker, and unfortunately, my parents had strife, and back then, for the most part, people didn't do therapy. And so, it felt important to me to try to create, some peace in my family as much as I could contribute to that. So in one of the ways, like I said, that I feel like I intuitively, in my intuitive memory, that I did that was, like I said, to stay loyal to the bond with my dad. And again, kind of need as little as possible from my mom, which helped for that purpose, but wasn't conducive to things that I did need my mom for. So and there were things that as I developed, it would have been nice to be closer to my mom, and that didn't happen. Now, fortunately, that excuse me, after my parents got divorced when I was around 20-ish, and my mom went out and was independent, she and I rekindled our relationship. She helped me get into therapy because around my 20s, I was like starting to have nervous breakdowns. I didn't really kind of know who I was. I needed, excuse me, I'm going to take a drink of. I needed therapy. I needed to find myself. I needed to come out. There was many things I needed. Now, my mom had gone back to school later in life and gotten her doctorate in psychology. So she was a wonderful, wonderful support in that way. And sorry, a little throat thing going on. So we did spend many hours talking. Even now that I was even technically an adult, I was in my early 20s, she would hold me. I mean, how many people get to have that opportunity as an adult to be held, by their biological mother? A lot of people don't, it can feel vulnerable to do something like that, but we did that. And it was very conducive. I mean, it didn't last forever and ever, but it was at that time, I felt like I needed to have that, and she was wonderfully conducive to that. So we got to have that. And like I said, she confided in me a lot of things, that went on with my dad, and it helped me kind of put some of the pieces of the puzzle together, which was really wonderful. So, like I said, my mom had gone back to school and become a psychologist. And she then had bought a house, and also as my brother and I and my sister were my younger, then there was another child, two children after me, my brother and then my other sister. We were also still trying to find ourselves, and we lived with her on and off different apartments she had, and then eventually she bought a house in the area. And then she started traveling. She would go skiing. But she particularly was a cyclist. She loved to bicycle. She started bicycling all over the United States. She started bicycling in Europe. And then around the year 2000, she was reading one of her bicycling magazines, and she saw an ad for a 1-year around the world bicycle trip. And she realized that, the cost of it, which would have been quite a bit of money, was about the same as it would cost her to just live a normal year in Long Island. So she was like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I'm going to do this. And she was getting ready to retire. So she did retire, and she sold her house and put what she wanted to keep in storage, and got a little, excuse me, 1-bedroom apartment across the street from where my brother lived with his wife and grandkids coming. And she went, so January 1st of the year 2000, she was with this tour that was going to go around the world bicycling for a whole year. And so January 1st of the year 2000, the group actually rode in the Rose Bowl parade, and then just kept on going, Baja and everything. And she shared with me that first day, or those first days, that she had a very interesting experience. She felt, her emotional insecurity came up. she said she felt like, a little kid that had been dropped off, for school or camp, and then the parents go away. She had that very strong sense of insecurity, but fortunately, it worked through, and she ended up riding her bicycle around the world basically for a whole year. And when they returned to LA 1 year later on New Year's Eve, 1 year later, my partner Jackie was still alive at the time. We drove from the Bay Area down to LA to meet her, to greet her, and coming back on her bike. And then they had a party that night and everything. It was a wonderful experience. So she was a world traveler. She rode her bike around the world, and even after she did that, she continued to travel as much as she could. She went and volunteered at the Iditarod, the dog sled race they have every year in Alaska. She wanted to go up to Alaska, so she volunteered for the Iditarod. She said, but she told them that she needed to have an indoor job. It was very cold up there, so she got a job working at one of the concessions, selling T-shirts or something like that. So she did that. And then, she had also dated, she had relationships, none of them turned into another husband, but she was a relationship type person. But she also, in all her travels, she at one point had gone out. There's a bicycle trip called the Ride Across Iowa. And she went and did the Ride Across Iowa at least once. I don't know how many times, but at least once. And it was on that trip that she met some people from a small town in South Dakota called Lead, South Dakota. And she went and she visited there. And she kind of fell in love with this little town. And it was a old gold mining town. And it's in the Black Hills. It's right near Mount Rushmore. And she fell in love with this little town. And she kind of had always, I guess, she was born in Wyoming, so she'd always had an interest in moving back west. In the meantime, she had also come out to California and done some of the transformational work that I had gotten involved in. So, and at one point, when I was teaching some of the courses from my previous mentor, I was teaching a course called the Mastery Course, where we helped people set and achieve goals. And my mom was doing the Mastery Course. I was, I think, online or on the phone at that point. And she had decided that she wanted to set a goal for herself to move out to Lead. And she was nervous about it, particularly also because she was nervous about, leaving the family. I was still living here in the Bay Area, but, she was living across the street from my brother, and there was grandkids there, and she loved that, but she didn't want to spend the rest of her life in suburban Long Island. So she, at one point, I'm a therapist, but I'm not traditionally trained. And here she was a doctor of psychology. And, as we did transformational work together for many years, and she, started calling me one of her teachers, I was like, wow, that was a big thing, because I had such respect for my mom and her studies and becoming a doctor and all that. But I remember her having a conversation with me. She says, I think I want to, move to South Dakota. She says, but I'm nervous, about telling the family. So it was really such an honor that she would confide in me that way and rely on me as a support. And we had a conversation about that. And, as usual, I would just tell her, well, just kind of tell them the truth the best you can. And hopefully they're going to understand. And if they don't, well, you still have to be true to yourself and follow your dreams, or else you won't be happy. So I remember supporting her in that junction. And it just so happened that I had just bought the house I had owned that I just sold up in Grass Valley. So we bought our houses within 3 months of each other. I bought my house in Grass Valley. She bought her house in South Dakota and moved out there. And this house that she bought was a 5-bedroom, 3-bath or something. It had 2 kitchens. It had been owned by a dentist. So it had many rooms where, he had his offices and his patients. And so she opened it as a hostel, and she called it the Main Street Manor Hostel. And it was a beautiful home. And it was like the nicest hostel you ever see. It was more like a bed and breakfast, but without the breakfast. So it's a really beautiful home. She really enjoyed it out there. And she's a very community type person, big time in volunteering. So she got involved in, there was also an opera house out there, a historic opera house that actually had burned down a couple of times, but it wasn't so bad that it couldn't be restored. So she got involved in helping restore it, and they still used to have shows there and different things. So for many years, she was on, a volunteer and then on the board of the historic Lead Opera House in, I think called the Gold Stake or something like that, the Opera House in Lead. And to the point where she was on the board for so many years that they, more years than you're supposed to be, recently they had to make her a director emeritus because she wasn't supposed to be being on the board anymore. She also served as the vice president of the historic Lead Deadwood Arts Council, where she was instrumental in the conception and implementation of an urban art project where artists would go around town and on the walls, that were available, they would do murals. So I remember her talking about that. She loved to do that. She was on the board of the City of Lead, the Comprehensive Planning Commission. She was a member of the Chamber of Commerce and the Kiwanis Club. She was a member of the lead chapter of the PEO Sisterhood, which was a philanthropic organization. So she did so many things. She was so involved in the community that I think some of you have heard me say that she finally had to leave her house. About a year ago, she had a fall in her house, and she turned 89 in February. So she was still pretty able, but she had started having health issues, and she had a fall in her house and decided that, when she felt like she really couldn't live on her own anymore, which felt like it was coming, that she would move back to Long Island and move in with my sister, actually in the house that we grew up in. So that was about a year ago. And then, so to make a long story short, on July 9th, my brother had gone out there to help her and pack stuff up, and she was in the hospital and blah, 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 and then got out. So on July 9th, she flew back to Long Island. But on July 8th, the city of Lead held a going away party for her, where the mayor of the city declared July 8th as Dr. Joan Irwin Day, which was, geez, how many people get to have a day? Well, we know we have Martin Luther King Day and all that kind of stuff. But so the Lead Deadwood Arts Center, declared July 8th, they called it Dr. Joan Irwin Day. So that was a real wonderful tribute for all of her volunteering and all the work that she did. So I only have about 5 more minutes here. There's so much more I could tell you, but I want to sort of jump into some of the experiences I've had in this past month. Like I said, I definitely feel like I have had her around. Some of you have heard me say too that she's the first person, when I did have my completion conversations with her, about a month ago, because on the Sunday before she died, she decided that she wanted to go into hospice. She sort of felt done, I guess, and she had been told that she probably should start considering dialysis, which, yeah, it didn't take her long to decide, I'm not doing that. So, and then pretty quickly she decided that she had a whole slew of meds she was taking, and she just felt done. I mean, I remember her about 7 years ago, 5 or 7 years ago, talking with me on the phone again, because we were very close at this, we had developed a really very close relationship all these years. 10 years ago when I had started doing my transformational training called the evolution training, she was in the first training. She was so supportive of my work. It was really wonderful. And then she was on the team. She was a volunteer on the team for every training for like 10 years. I think she only missed 2 of them. One because there was a snowstorm, I think, in South Dakota in May, which there typically is. And then one time I think she had travel problems or something. So she only missed 2 trainings in like 10 years, and we used to do them twice a year. So we were very close. We talked about everything. We used to do a grief process in the training. It was very about teaching us how to have all of our emotions. And she and I used to sit in front of the group one time, like I would think of different ways to teach about grief. And one of the things, one time at least, we probably did this a couple of times, but we sat in front of the group and I shared with her, because I was having pre-grief. A few years ago, I started having pre-grief about her passing, and I would just share with that, and just share my experience. And, but like you said, about, a month ago when and I know then there was one time she called me and she was sharing with me, she said something like, I think she felt like she was at a junction in her life. And she said internally she heard a voice, or she was asking herself, like, so are you done? Is this like you done? No more interest in life? And she realized no, I'm not done. I'm not done. And this was like 5 years ago. And, and of course, she's done so much more even since then. So, but obviously, about a month ago, she, I guess, felt done. And so that Sunday, she let my brother and sister, who the four of us, the two of the four of us that are there and local with her, uh, and so they took her, and I guess she was anxious about the process, but I mean, again, I wasn't, unfortunately, I didn't get to be there and have more in-depth conversations with her, but they took her to the hospital so she could just begin a hospice process and be given some meds to be relaxed with. And so that happened, and I did speak with her that day and that Sunday, and told her I understood and whatever she wanted. Of course, we would support her wishes. And so I think she thought that they were going to give her meds where she wasn't going to wake up, which wasn't the case. You can't do that in New York. And so the next morning when she woke up, she did say, she was like, wait a minute, why am I still here? But so they were just, but what part of what as I continue to sit with this, and again, I'm if I have any regret at all, which this is the only thing, that I didn't get to be with her those last few days, because I'm my dad was the only other person I've ever been with, actually been there when they died, except for a couple of my dogs. Um, but I'm also fascinated by the process, and and again, I know that they're each unique, and I'm particularly interested here too because I feel like essentially on a Sunday she declared she was done, and then she could have lived for weeks. She could have lived for months. I mean, the doctor had said it wasn't going to be hours, and it wasn't, he said it wasn't going to be hours, it wasn't going to be months. It was probably going to be days or weeks, and it was 4 days. It was 4 days till her body took its last breath. And I feel like, I had an awareness. I feel like, wow, how masterful, that she gently, and again, because she wasn't in pain, she wasn't suffering. Um, so how masterful that she declared on a given day she was done. And then within 4 days, her body cooperated because she wasn't really, she like sick, she was just done. And so so I was gonna fly there that following Monday, but she didn't make it that long. I would have liked to be there. I didn't feel like I could get there sooner. It was too stressful for me, and I that just didn't feel appropriate for my needs, and also the quality of presence I would have liked to be there for her. So just the couple of brief synchronicities were I think I went to one of my jobs like I think a couple of days later, and the calendar was still on like July or something. And I remember, and it was a calendar from the local flower place. And I turned the calendar and I saw a big picture of lilies, and I was like, oh, it just touched me, lilies. And a lot of times lilies are the flower for death or rebirth or that kind of thing. So I saw lilies, and then the next day I think I was going into Trader Joe's, and I was like, oh, I should buy some flowers because I haven't been buying flowers in a long time. I was like, and of course the first flowers that got my attention were the lilies, so I bought those. And but I also bought some orange carnations just because it's the fall and it felt like fall. And I had them here in a vase in my room. I actually have purple ones back there. I don't know if you can see. But it was interesting because as the lilies were dying, the orange carnations were blooming. And it just felt like a beautiful representation of transition. And, again, other than my father's death, where there was a very distinct thing happening the night he died, where, a clock that had not been running started running, and it was on the right time, all by itself in his home. I haven't had that kind of experience with my mom, although, like as I had shared with some of you, she's the first person I was able to say in my completion conversation with her, and Mom, we can communicate, because we had that conversation before. She knows I'm a spiritualist. She'd been to Celebrate Life with me a couple times. And so I feel like very subtly she's coming to me, and like out of the blue, like an awareness came up of a time when I was in a very painful relationship, and I didn't I didn't know how to communicate. And so I didn't know how to, she would have been the one I would have told, and I didn't know how to do that, but she came to me. I felt like she came to me. Why that memory came up out of the blue, you know, why? Well, of course, because I think she's sending me her love and her confidence. I was also seeing the number 555 a lot, and I was looking it up in numerology, and it's the angel number that's you're entering a new phase of your life. It's about change, freedom, and new beginnings. There's just so many beautiful synchronicities. So, and I think the other thing is that, I mean, sometimes I ask myself, it's like, how do you do grief? Like, am I doing grief appropriately? Not that there really is an appropriate way, but I have some of that awareness. And I think it was about a week after she died, I went with one of my friends up to Calistoga to a place we like to go with a pool, and it was still warm. And so we just had a day where we got to do what we like to do, hang out in the sun and drink a little champagne and just relax and enjoy ourselves. And I came home from that day. I was so tired, and but when I woke up the next morning, I really felt joy again, and I felt like I was reset back into my joy. Soon after her passing, and I realized Mom would want that. Of course she wants me to live from my joy, and like anybody, it's going to be an up and down process, but that's definitely a wonderful message that I have. So there's so much more I could have shared with you, maybe in a future talk, but I thank you for this opportunity to share some of who Joan Irwin was, and the wonderful person she is, and the wonderful mother she was, the grandmother. And that's one other thing, that I had a conversation the day that she died with one of my nephews who called me, and we were saying part of what I felt in my grief that particular day was, it was also the joy and the gratefulness of who she was as a mother and a grandmother, because so many people don't have anything near that, unfortunately, in their mothers or their grandmothers, and we got to have a remarkable woman, a very remarkable, loving woman, to be our mother and our grandmother. So anyway, thanks again for listening. I hope something that I shared had some value for you, and blessings. Thank you.